Very good. Well, let me just start off by saying thank you. We appreciate you joining us and spending a moment of your day exploring how we can leverage self-service automation for public and private clouds. It's been a pretty interesting year, to say the least. And as I go out there and I talk with various different clients, certainly recognizing that each of our clients is unique with unique business models, unique applications and services that drive and support their business. But we are seeing some common threads, and those common threads are occurring in the vast amount of change that we see happening across the marketplace. Some of that change is intentional. So as we look at transforming our business, modernizing infrastructure in order to support those changes, of course, we see a lot of that going on, but we also see a lot of change that wasn't necessarily in our plan when we started the year. This COVID scenario has put a lot of us through many hoops as we figure out how do we shift, how do we transform very, very quickly in order to remain relevant. We see, among other things, workloads being transitioned, great adoption of Azure, GCP, AWS, and others, in creating truly hybrid clouds that are extension of our IT support strategies. We see workforce enablement strategies are shifting. For many of us, we saw earlier this year, literally within a matter of days, we went from, we have the ability to support a remote workforce to having hundreds or thousands of workers that we now have to support across a distributed environment. So along with that, some changes in terms of technology that we might be leveraging to deliver quality experiences to those end users, data being leveraged in new ways, right? Creating new lines of business, new revenue streams, new insights into our customers and how we can continue to drive better value and better relationships around those customers. And then, data and security becoming increasingly paramount. So if all this change and transformation wasn't enough, we're pressed with increasing concerns around security and overall protection and availability of our data. So having said that, I wanted to take just a couple minutes and take a look at some of the changes that we see happening across the marketplace and how we see that affecting how we're transforming both our businesses, supporting customers internally and externally, as well as the shifts that we need to make in terms of infrastructure in order to make all that happen. The first among those is this notion of mobility in this modern workspace. As I mentioned, for many of us, hundreds or thousands of users went remote in a period of days. So that really introduced some or accelerated some changes in how we're supporting those workspaces. We've seen, among other things, significant increases in adoption of virtual desktop, various different forms of delivering applications and services to those end users. We have done some of that on our own, right? As we went from being a global entity, now figuring out how do we support thousands of workers and still continue to drive positive experiences for our customers. So really exploring, in fact, deploying virtual desktop application, virtualization, packaging, delivery, and even extending that into the cloud space and the hybrid cloud space. I saw an announcement not too long ago. Microsoft in their Q3 saw 40% increase year over year in Azure adoption through O365. On top of that, we see a number of those workloads shifting into that cloud-like environment. So we're really kind of bridging the gap between traditional on-prem and into some of these cloud platforms. I think a lot of that was probably driven around, how precious capital was and is as we kind of navigate through these COVID times. Cloud provides a relatively easy way for us to avoid or delay some of that capital expenditure and spin up some of those workloads relatively quickly. And then, looking at cloud native, Internet of Things, advanced analytics, and artificial intelligence related technologies. So as we're making some of these shifts in the cloud, we're also looking at either creating new applications or maybe re-architecting some of those applications in a cloud native type way, taking advantage of containers, containerizations, and whatnot. All of these things really creating some great opportunities and challenges for us at the same time. And then we take a look at the overarching umbrella of cyber threats, that whole GRC conversation, because as we're looking at shifting how we're supporting end users and workers, providing better experiences there, as we're looking at either shifting or maybe revamping our strategy around cloud and hybrid cloud environments, looking at deploying applications in new ways and oftentimes creating applications, really can't go too far without asking some questions around, hey, am I secure? Am I doing this in a way that doesn't necessarily increase my exposure to threats as we move forward? All these things really kind of coming together and prompt us to look at how can I modernize my infrastructure in a way that will allow me to accelerate through all of these different categories, be able to provide new applications and services to the business, be able to provide quality experiences for those users, be able to allow us to safely and seamlessly adopt and shift workloads into this cloud and hybrid cloud type of environment. And all these things kind of come together, and I think it's really what brought us here today. We're exploring how we can leverage self-service automation for these private and public like clouds, and help us become, whether we're having those workloads in an on-prem or in a cloud-like environment, really become more cloud-like in our ability to automate delivery of these solutions to our end users. At Insight, we really are here to help our clients modernize and secure those platforms that are so necessary for that transformation. We're doing this with an eye on really three key ideas. The first is that IT transformation, IT modernization is really a necessary component to enable this larger digital transformation and business transformation that so many of our customers are asking for. We see infrastructure as playing a very critical role in being able to support that level of transformation. And in a lot of cases, we see those modern data centers becoming truly cloud, not necessarily in destination, but cloud in terms of its ability to provide a service model, rapidly being able to spin up, spin down resources, compute, network storage, and applications and services to those end users in an effort to accelerate transformation and ultimately achieve the business goals that we're all searching for. So with that, I'd like to turn this over to my peer, Corey Carroz, and walk us through how we can start to look at automation and create a self-service model, self-service mechanism for either a private or a public cloud model. Corey?
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I am Corey Carroz. I'm one of our senior solution architects for our data center and cloud transformation team here at Insight. I wanted to give you a kind of a quick walkthrough of a automation and constant integration, constant deployment workshop that we've developed for our clients. This workshop is 100% free of cost, and it's really designed around, okay, let's understand what you're trying to get out of automation, and what skill sets do you currently have, and where are your gaps to completing what you're envisioning. This is a completely free workshop, so I encourage you guys to reach out to your Insight account executive to find out more about it and possibly set one up in the future if you like what you see moving forward. I wanted to give you guys a quick walkthrough of some of the talking points and where we like to start when we kick off those automation workshops. And where I'd like to start is really around where we were 5 or 6 years ago, what the messaging around automation was, and really where I feel the industry as a whole kind of missed the mark, and Insight was definitely included in that. 5 or 6 years ago, I was on a team called the Hybrid Cloud Practice here at Insight, and at the time, our go-to-market strategy was around the idea of this hybrid cloud assessment. So I want to kind of walk you through some of that basic talk track from that old envisioning presentation of that assessment, and kind of highlight what we've learned from that and really where the gaps were. So as we progress forward, some of these next few slides are going to look a little bit dated, and that's because they are dated, but I think it really sets a really good foundation. So at the time, what we focused on, or where we started, was really that IT is a really siloed in our client's environment, and that siloed nature really what it does is that these individual organizations and their users behind it really most of their time went to maintaining the environment, keeping the lights on, and putting out fires as they kind of arise, opposed to really investing their time into making their environment better. And we kind of looked at this siloed nature, and one of the pieces of that is that it really resulted in a slow response to the business, where it would take a lot of time to take an application from a request went in, to put it through test, to go through development and push that application to production. And what we found is this process could take days, weeks, or months, depending on what the application is and what the internal policies are. And it was very much a manual task. And this challenge was kind of exasperated a little bit when more millennials came into the workforce, where they grew up with the App Store on their phone, and they wanted that instant gratification and had a hard time understanding, well, if we're in an enterprise space, why can't it get an application right away? And that slow response to them really perpetuated this idea of shadow IT, where they're like, well, it takes forever for me to get a new application, so I'm just going to take my corporate credit card and spin up some virtual machines in Azure or AWS, which has its own challenges and concerns that come along with it. So at the time, we were kind of like, well, wouldn't it be great to take this process that could take days, weeks, or months and get it down to minutes? And on the surface, this sounded really great. And the solution at the time was to put some software layer in there that could help manage public and private clouds, and build a self-service portal that those millennials were asking for, that mirrored the App Store on our phones, where they can kind of log in, find the application they want, and check it out and get access to it immediately. But when we take a step back and look at this, what we realized is, this is just one of many use cases of how our end users want to consume IT, and this is really only good at one thing, giving that self-service portal. So really, where were those gaps? And those gaps were, well, yes, we were siloed before, but really what we ended up actually doing was, taking all the compute, storage, network, and virtualization teams and siloing them together, and yet the application team is kind of left off to its side. And so why was that? A lot of it has to do is with the application owners. They kind of have their own work streams and processes and how they like to do business and how they like to build things. And going to a self-service portal and checking things out is generally not the way they want to consume IT. So the result of this was we'd work with everyone, the app team included, and build this self-service portal. Well, what we quickly found was those applications were not being updated because the application team didn't want to go into the infrastructure team's tools. And on the flip side of that, the infrastructure team really doesn't know how the application team, works and how they do their day-to-day job. Or if a request came in to stand up a new SQL server, sure, they could deploy a VM from template and possibly, deploy a PowerShell script. But past that, they generally don't know how the database team really builds SQL, their SQL environment out. So there's this kind of gap of understanding, and really the goal is, how can we bring these two groups together? And so the other two use cases that we want to focus on is, source control management, where a lot of the application team just wants to, submit their code to, some sort of private repository like a GitHub or a Bitbucket, and have that kick off some process in the back and just be notified that their application is available and how to get to it. Or they just want to, make API calls and pull virtual machines out on a loop. So let's kind of dive in a little bit more into the components that make up vRealize Automation 8, and then we'll kind of jump into some of the solution and talk track of how we discover how their application teams are looking to work and kind of help them make a constant integration, constant deployment pipeline. So we look at VRA 8. It's really built from the ground up, opposed to past versions of vRealize Automation. There's three major components of the realized automation now. The first is CodeStream, and this is really that new piece that helps us build complicated pipelines and build those constant integration, constant deployment pipelines so that we can update apps and push them into a piece like Service Broker, where the Service Broker is kind of that front-end web portal where they would log in and check out their applications. And then if you're familiar with vRealize automation, Cloud Assembly is really going to look a lot closer to what you've used in the past, where it's the place where you can kind of provision your blueprints and start building out your applications and how they are going to be consumed moving forward. So if the goal is to enable the application teams to continue to work the way they want to and the way it makes more sense for their business, let's look at some of the basic talk tracks and where we'd like to start with that conversation. We'd like to bring up this slide that kind of goes through the periodic table of DevOps tools. And I know it's kind of an eye chart, and there's a lot of different components of this. We have source control management over here, but think of this as kind of like, these are all the ingredients that we could find in our pantry or possibly have to go to the grocery store and pick up. And so the goal is to figure out, if we're trying to make a cookie, what is the design goal for that cookie so we can make the appropriate recipe with these ingredients. If the design goal is to, make an Oreo cookie that is really cheap to produce, we can sell a lot of, that's absolutely great. It could be a fit for some environments, but some environments might just want to try to make the most, health-conscious cookie possible. I know it's an oxymoron, or maybe it's the most gourmet cookie that's available. But the idea is, let's understand what you're looking to do, what ingredients you have in your current pantry, and what skill sets you have around the recipes you have in place today. And let's figure out, what we need to go to the grocery store and pick up to complete that recipe. With the end goal of, really taking that, integrating it into something like CodeStream so we can have that constant integration, constant deployment pipeline that enables our app teams to continue to work the way they want to work. So let's take a quick look at, some of those integrations with source code management and what that means to the application teams that are provisioning applications. So as kind of a starting point, I'd like to take a step and take a look at the idea of a pipeline. So we built these pipelines of, if a user wants to deploy an app, what does that app go through in terms of a process to bring it online? And we really have a lot of different, options here. If you kind of look at this, this is kind of a basic pipeline, but we could see, hey, look, we're deploying this. It deploys a web front end. When it goes down to the test phase, once we're in test, we're notified in Slack to say that it's there. And then possibly at the end, we could get to a point that it's, what is the approval process and what does the teardown approval process look like, so that the appropriate teams that need to approve and tear things down are notified when they're ready to do so. And we can always add extra steps to this where we can, add more testing and what we want to test it against and how that process would look. But to use this pipeline, we have this idea of endpoints. And endpoints are, where are we pulling these sources from? In this particular case, we're going to use something like GitHub. And if you look here, we see we have a push. So what this means is when our developers go in and submit new code in Git, it's going to push to VRA via API calls and kick off that pipeline we just saw on the previous slide. So if this was the repository for a simple web front end to be created, our developers go in, they update their code, they submit it. We can see that job has started, and it'll run through the pipeline that we pre-created. And at that point, once it's completed, we get a notification around it, and here's the URL to how to connect to it. And that's kind of completely different than what we used to have before. We kind of had to manually update applications, where something like this, based off that pipeline that we're feeding into, we can make it so if this is the correct version of the application, we can integrate it so that it automatically goes into that web app store that we kind of looked at earlier. And we could do a lot more things just beyond that. So maybe, our users do want to, log into this web store and be able to consume applications. Maybe it's a simple, Ubuntu VM. It's just a single application. Or maybe they're looking to, get their feet wet with containers and see what, Tanzu has to offer to them. Well, we can build a complete pipeline around, standing up a complete, Tanzu environment where if we, kick this job off, it would go into that pipeline. And you can't see that. It's supposed to zoom in, but it doesn't. Where it kicks off that process, and just like you saw before, we can check that process, see where it is, and then once that application is deployed, that end user would receive an email notification. Hopefully you can see that good enough here. That would have a link to where that container environment is and how we log into it, so that they can immediately start playing with containers and kind of getting their feet wet. So this is absolutely a huge change from what we used to look at with automation, where, yes, we always had that self-service portal, and that, fulfilled some of the needs. But now a tool like Realize Automation is really the whole picture of, being able to fully support constant integration, constant deployment pipelines, and that DevOps mentality where end users or our developers can just kind of declare what they need and it kick off a back-end process and just be notified that it's ready for them. So with the end goal of let's govern, how our users are consuming IT, regardless of their use case and how they want to consume it, and just put wrappers around how we're going to manage security, what the content library is, and really, if a user is requesting a resource, where do we put it? Is it going to go on-prem? Is it going to go into the public cloud? Is it going to be pushed to the edge? Having a tool that can kind of manage and govern all that is our end goal, and that's what Realize Automation is, a great platform to help you build. And our workshops are built around helping you realize how to put all these pieces together so we can find the correct recipe to support your business. And then with that, Tony, I will pass the ball over to you.
Yeah, that was a pretty good summary, Corey. So it was interesting. You talk about some of those slides being dated, and this is the way that we talked 4, 5, 6 years ago. I think for a lot of us, that's where we're at today. So trying to figure out how can we effectively bridge that gap to meet some of these business goals and business outcomes that we're looking to support here today. I hope that much of what Corey has mentioned has resonated with you, and if it does, we encourage you to reach out to your account executive and engage us and challenge us to kind of walk through some of these scenarios with you. As Corey mentioned, we have designed a number of workshops that are designed to really help you define what your automation strategy needs to look like. Typically through these workshops, we'll engage in a cross-team discussion where we'll explore, really what the current state looks like. Let's look at your current DevOps processes. Let's look at the tools. Let's look at the ingredients, if you will, that you currently are leveraging today, and then spend some time to really define what that end state needs to look like. Corey mentioned the cookie scenario. So let's determine through this workshop, through this engagement effort, really what sort of cookie are you trying to create? And then once we have that defined, we'll work with you and your collective teams, review your existing application architectures, take a look at some of those dependencies, take a look at really where you can start to insert automation to accelerate some of that value that you're looking for. And then through all that, really start to define a strategy, help you make the correct tool set, the correct ingredient selection so that you're able to very quickly get to the outcomes that you're looking for. As Corey mentioned, we do these workshops as a pre-sales motion to really help drive incremental value for our customers and help accelerate their ability to leverage some of these automation-related technologies. So to that end, when you're ready, not only do we have expertise in terms of a number of different automation platforms and how to very quickly and effectively integrate technologies like VRA into your overall model, but really be able to go in and assess your current technology environment. Take a look at and establish a baseline of where you're at today. With that, combined with a defining of what this desired insight looks like, we can help you design, help you make technology selections appropriate for your use case, design and then accelerate your ability to realize that value through Insight's professional services arm and rapidly deploy some of these solutions and stand it up for your business. All the while taking into account how to effectively integrate all of this into your existing environment as you go through your modernization efforts across your enterprise.
And then, Tony, what's really interesting about that is, we've been doing these type of workshops for quite some time. And what we find is, every client we talk to is a completely different, unique snowflake. And what they're looking for is just a little bit different. Some clients only want to focus on that self-service portal and, possibly maybe, they have some developers that are, using Terraform, and they just want to, slightly integrate that into their process. That is completely fine. And then we also find clients that are, eventually want to get to this automation software layer, but really what we need on the front end is really help around designing that CI/CD pipeline and how we get there, and really being able to bring all the application teams together where, the application teams are often very siloed like we saw before, where, there could be the SQL database team and there could be the web team or whatever it is within that organization. And oftentimes, each one of those groups like to use a completely different skill set, which kind of, makes things a little bit more difficult. So sometimes our process with those design workshops are, just going in and, talking to the individual teams and figuring out, what's working, what's not, and then find like a way to kind of be that in-between mediary that brings the worlds together so that eventually when they're ready, we can, work with the infrastructure team to put in this automation layer and kind of, bridge the gap and bring everything together.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it really is a journey, and we're all going to start from where we're at. And that starting point could be vastly different from one to the other. So regardless of wherever you're at in that journey, know that we're prepared to take you from where you're at to ultimately defining a plan to get you to where it is that you want to go. And as I mentioned earlier, we definitely recognize that our customers are different, but there's these threads of commonality, and these threads are, hey, we all need to transform. We all need to figure out how can I leverage both current technology and intelligently introduce newer technology into my environment in order to better differentiate me and my business as we look to move forward and navigate through these current times.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think that is. Go ahead, Corey.
No, go for it. I was going to say, with that being said, we're kind of finished with the base of this webinar, and we are going to open things up for questions now.
Okay, it doesn't look like there are any questions that are coming in, but if there are, please go ahead and submit, and we will get back to you with your answers. Thank you for attending today's webcast. An on-demand version of this webcast will be available within 2 to 3 days, and you will receive an email notification once a recording is available. Thank you for participating in today's webcast.